Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at DRJ. We thank you for joining us today and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted and we ask you to utilize the question panel you'll find on the right hand side of your screen. Our speaker today will attempt to answer as many of these as possible at the end of today's webinar. Today's sponsor is Bluelock and today's topic is 8 poor practices for IT disaster recovery and what to do instead. Our speaker today is Jeff Ton. Jeff has over 30 years of experience in business and information technology, the last 10 years of which he was a CIO for 2 of Central Indiana's most respected organizations and was very innovative with their cloud strategy. In 2015, Jeff joined Bluelock as Executive Vice President of Product and Service Development and is responsible for driving Bluelock's product and service vision and strategy. Jeff focuses on the evolving IT landscape and the changing needs of clients while driving value in their organization now and in the future. Jeff is also a member of Forbes Tech Council, and with no further introductions, I'd like to welcome and turn the mic over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Bob, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you're joining from. So I thought about changing the name of this presentation from 8 poor practices for IT disaster recovery and adding the caveat that make you want to cry. But I guess in light of the last several days of activity with the ransomware, it's not really funny, so I decided just to leave it alone and leave it this way. But we are going to talk later on in the presentation about how disaster recovery can be a mitigation strategy for attacks such as ransomware like WannaCry. Bob mentioned a little bit about my background, and I want to highlight just a couple of things from that. Prior to joining Bluelock, I was in corporate IT for 35 years. That really means 35 years in disaster recovery, being involved in it first from an application level, and then for a number of years, about 10 years, as CIO, being ultimately responsible for disaster recovery of a variety of different systems, and I will try to weave some of those real-life examples into this presentation to give you a glimpse into some real scenarios. Today we're going to talk just a little bit about some industry insights related to disaster recovery, and then we're going to jump into the 8 common mistakes and what you should be doing instead, and then we'll wrap up with some segment about Bluelock and how we solve some of the disaster recovery problems that clients bring to us. And as Bob mentioned, there's going to be Q&A at the end, so feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Not too long ago, a company's contingency plan for downtime was paper and pencil. But today, every company is a tech company, and this slide really highlights that. With digital transformation going on in almost every industry, technology and the information technology systems that support that digital transformation are becoming more and more important. I can remember the first months as a new CIO earlier in my career and sitting down with one of our senior vice presidents was for a company that did real estate development and construction. And I asked him, I wanted his views on IT to understand how he felt about technology and the role it played in his day-to-day business. And he told me, he says, well, you know, IT here at our company does a really good job. Whenever my laptop's broken, B comes and fixes it, and it's just great customer service. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind that, oh my, IT can be so much more strategic than that. So I asked him about disaster recovery and how he views that. And his response really was, well, you know, we've been building buildings for a couple of 100 years and most of it with paper and pencil. So if we had to, I suppose we could go back and do it on paper and pencil. But I'm here to tell you that manual processes really no longer work. The speed of business has changed and manual processes just cannot keep up. Even if you can find somebody in your company that still knows how to do it the manual way. When was the last time you called customer support? Maybe it was for an online retailer, or it was a product you had purchased, and you're calling for support, and the technician on the other side of the phone said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'd be happy to help you, but our computers are down right now." It really ticks you off. And I can't emphasize enough that in this always connected, always on economy, people expect you to be available. Even if you're in a B2B world, even if you're in a random industry like farming or agriculture, one that doesn't seemingly have a lot of technology involved. But if you dig underneath the covers and look at tractors today, for example, are connected devices. They're transmitting data, they're receiving data from sensors within the field. They're a connected device. When a tractor goes down, the farmer can't work. And there's actually a big struggle right now between the independent farmer and the manufacturer of the tractor, because the farmer wants to repair his or her tractor right away, and the manufacturer is saying, "No, wait, you got to wait on us because of all the computer sensors that are in there. We don't want anything in there broken." So it's this interesting tension between getting back online right away, but also making sure that the connectivity still works. A lot of companies today, in response to this always on, always available need, are turning to DRaaS, Disaster Recovery as a Service. You might hear it called DRaaS, you might hear it called DRaaS, but basically it's leveraging cloud technology and cloud economics to provide availability and resiliency that today's organizations need and demand. I'm going to tell a story on myself as a CIO later in this presentation, but we turned to disaster recovery as a service to solve a problem that we didn't even know existed at the time. It had to do with a big snowstorm that we'll talk about later. So just what are some of the common pitfalls that we see clients or prospective clients struggling with every day? We're going to look at 8 poor practices and talk about what you should be doing instead. The first one may catch you as a surprise, not aligning on strategy. Strategy, really, when we're talking IT, disaster recovery, isn't the strategy, if it's broken, fix it as fast as possible? Most DR plans focus just on the technology, but as you can see, it should also involve the people and the process. Who's going to do what? When are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? And where are the handoffs? The strategy is vitally important to the success of a disaster recovery planning. How does it fit within the overall organization's business continuity plan? Does the company even have a business continuity plan? And how does that BCP fit into the rest of the corporate strategy? It goes beyond mere prioritization of applications. For a time, I was the CIO for Goodwill Industries here in Central Indiana. That organization has 4 very distinct business units. Retail, which is the financial engine, manufacturing, and the manufacturing division, which creates jobs and also generates revenue. The educational division, which provides education to high school students and adults. And the mission division, which helps train people and prepare them for jobs and careers. So very diverse businesses. Depending on the outage that occurs, the priorities of those applications in a disaster recovery scenario is going to be dramatically different. Who is impacted? How are they impacted? If the internet goes down, what do you recover first? Do you try to bring the education back online where you've got classroom full of students that might be having lessons plans for the day that were online and now they can't be accessed? Or retail, who's trying to make sales and leverage credit cards in making those sales? Then you look at another outage like a blizzard. How does that impact the priorities? Does it change? Well, during a blizzard, schools are closed. The retail stores are closed. So what's your priority? Well, priority at that time are the mission services that help people in times of disaster. We need to make sure that those are online and ready. something as simple as a building automation system, the system that creates and controls the environmentals in a building, the temperature and the access. Those systems go out. How do you prioritize what happens first? Again, who's impacted? Who can get into the building? Who can't get in the building? You have to understand all of those impacts as you're making your strategy. The third part of aligning on strategy is also understanding culture. And we'll talk more about culture in a later slide, but what I want to highlight here is you have to understand how is technology viewed within the organization. In other words, is disaster recovery a shared responsibility or is it IT's job? That's going to play into your strategy and that's going to play into your processes that you build in your DR plan. Mistake number 2 involves communication to the business and expectation setting. Not setting proper expectations to your business partners can lead to issues in bringing the systems back online in the appropriate time. Most IT departments that we've run into will communicate to the business, well, we can have your systems restored in 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever the number is. But what they're really quoting is what's called the technical RTO. That's getting the infrastructure ready and running, and maybe the applications are running, but they haven't been validated. The connectivity back to those systems has not been initiated, and the end user still doesn't have access to those systems. What you need to be communicating is what we call the true RTO, or the recovery time, the time that it takes to recover your systems from the time the declaration of the disaster to the time that the end user is actually able to use the system. That is the true RTO, or recovery time objective. Another aspect of disaster recovery is the RPO, and just to kind of level set on the definition there, the RPO is the recovery point objective. In other words, the point in time in which you will go back to recover to. It loosely also equates to the potential time for loss of data. So if your RPO, your recovery point, is 24 hours, you're probably going to lose 24 hours worth of data. So that's an easy way to kind of keep those two separate, RPO and RTO. That takes us to the third mistake, and that is not tiering the applications. What do we mean by application tiering? Application tiering is the concept of mapping your applications not only from a technology dependency perspective. Some applications will need to be recovered at the same time. Other applications may have dependencies related to data that the database server has to come up at the same time. So you map those dependencies out, but it takes it a step further, and it also talks about the value that those applications provide in your environment to your business, because you may want to map an application that provides much higher value to the business. You may want to map that into a higher tier. So like a tier 1, for example, that you might be able to recover in under an hour versus a tier 3 that might be 24 to 48 hours. So as you're defining your true RTO and your RTO, you have to understand how long is it going to take to build it out, how long are the steps that are going to take to validate it before you hand it to the end user, and take that all into account as you're tiering out your applications. The other thing that we like to talk about is recovery waves. So you'll see in this slide that we've got something defined here as wave 1. So it's a tier 2 application. So it's going to be second in priority to the tier 1 applications. And it's got a technical RTO of under 30 minutes and a true RTO of 4 hours. But it's only a certain number of the applications that are being recovered, because in wave 2, you've got another set of applications that have a technical RTO of 6 hours and a total combined true RTO of 10 hours. One of the reasons for doing this is With technology today, you can automate a lot of this recovery process, and so all these applications can be coming online very, very quickly. Well, you can't consume them fast enough. You can't validate them. You can't provide the connectivity to the end users and bring them fully back online as fast as technology can bring the infrastructure online, which is why you divide it into waves so that you're managing the highest priority applications first, the highest value applications first, because as you continue to build, you'll see that wave 3, now your true RTO is already up to just under 24 hours. And then finally, your final set of applications, which probably would be recovered in a little over 24 hours. So you have to take all those into consideration, especially when you're talking about ITDR at scale. So not tiering your applications goes hand in hand with what we talked about at mistake 2, setting the true expectations to the business of what the true RTO is. Mistake number 4, not planning for the full gamut of events. There's an incredible number of events that could cause you to initiate an IT disaster recovery. Some of those events you have to be very reactive to. Events like fire, explosion, earthquakes, human error. You can't always plan in advance, so to speak, for those. You need to understand what the impacts of those are on your systems. But then you've got another set that you can put some things in place to be a little more proactive. You know, for example, through weather reports that hurricanes are coming, or that a flood may come, or you're in the area of a volcano, and you can put steps in place to begin to manage your plan in advance of those disasters hitting, so that in the event that those things do occur, you're prepared. And then you've got the Ready 5. So think the Top Gun phrase, Ready 5 or Alert 5, where you have to be ready to react within a moment's notice. Things like power outage, network outage, hardware or software failure. These are the things that can potentially catch you off guard. One of the things that you'll notice in here is that human error is listed in each one of these things. By far, human error is still one of the most major causes of the need to recover IT systems. Whether it's something was inadvertently deleted, or like in the case of Amazon Web Services several years ago, a patch was released, or not several years ago, but several weeks ago, a patch was released that took them down for a number of hours. Those types of things happen, and you have to be ready to respond to those very, very quickly. But I will say that DR is not just for disasters anymore. In the past, doing a recovery was too time-consuming. You couldn't really do a partial recovery. If you had an issue that you needed to recover from, you were going to have to recover your entire data center. Today's technology enables you to do this much faster and much more agilely, and therefore you can do partial recoveries. You may have an application whose database was corrupted, and rather than trying to do a restoration from backups or rebuild the database, you could fail that application over to a disaster recovery as a service provider and run that application out of that data center rather than your own until you can correct it and bring it back. The other thing that you should keep in mind for disaster recovery as a service especially is it can be a mitigation against ransomware attacks. Everybody's heard about WannaCry and the crippling effect that has had on companies across the globe. But because you're using disaster recovery as a service, you have the ability to go back to various recovery points. So you can recover relatively quickly in a quarantine area, verify that recovery data is not infected, and then bring that failover live. If you were to try to do that with tape, it could take hours and hours and hours to recover, maybe even days to recover. So because you can do this rapidly, if you were to recover to a recovery point using disaster recovery as a service and find out that, yes, that recovery point was also infected, you could turn around and scrap all of that, restart your recovery until you get to a point in time that is clean, and then use that to move forward. So it really is a great mitigation strategy against ransomware. Now, going back to planning for the full gamut of events, here's a tip for you. As you're doing your disaster recovery test, or if you work for a company that does full business continuity testing, make a game of it. Invent scenarios and then role play those scenarios. It could be some of the things that we've used in the past or that we've seen in the past are active shooter events. How does that impact the business continuity plan? How does that impact ITDR? It could be a fire alarm that was set off in the building and impacts your ability to get into your data center. Telling another story on myself, when I was at Goodwill, when I first started there, the fire suppression in the data center at Goodwill was water-based. Think about someone pulling a fire alarm in that building and the tragedy that that would have on the computer equipment. We fixed that very, very quickly, but there are still cases where companies have water-based fire suppression near valuable IT gear. Another one that I've seen in the past are toxic spills from trains. If your business is located near train track and there's a derailment, you may not be able to get to your data center for days, even though it's fully operational at the time of the disaster. So you have to role play all of those scenarios so that you are prepared in the event of one of those occurrences. And speaking of being prepared, the best way of being prepared is testing. We see time and time again companies that do not test their ITDR plan, or they test it once a year. You have to wrap a good process around an iterative testing scenario so that you are updating your documentation, you're testing it, you're doing lessons learned, and then you're updating the documentation again. Many, many years ago, my first opportunity to experience DR testing, I was the application representative on an annual DR test for a company, and it was the first time that they were doing the application testing. They had done infrastructure failover before, but never as far as doing the application, so it was a brand new process. And in those days, what you did was you bought time on a cold site somewhere. Most of the time it was another data center somewhere. So you had a fixed amount of time that you bought once a year in which you go to that data center, you restore all of your applications, all of your data, bring your systems up and verify that they work. So for us, that meant driving from Indianapolis to Chicago, where the DR data center was. And when we arrived at the data center, again, we're on the clock. We only have 36 hours that we've rented this space for. Joe looks at Larry and says, "Larry, you brought the tapes, right?" And Larry looked at Joe and said, "I thought you brought the tapes." So yes, this whole team of people had driven all the way to Chicago without the tapes to recover from. Now we had to wait 3.5, 4 hours for someone to go get the tapes in Indianapolis and drive them up to us. We ran into other problems. They had trouble with the tape readers reading the tapes. They had trouble getting the applications to load. So all in all, most people counted that as a disastrous disaster recovery test. But it really was a learning experience. You can learn from that and you can add to your knowledge. You can put in checklists that say, someone's got to verify that the tapes are in the car on the way up. Someone has to verify the release levels on the tape drives to be sure that they match the release levels on the drives that wrote the tape so that you can read them. So this iterative process really is what's important. You have to follow this well-defined process for testing, lessons learned, and updating the documentation. Which leads us to mistake number 6, not documenting and updating your playbook. So the playbook is your script. This is what tells you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, so that when you need to recover your systems, you're able to do this. It's very important that your documentation is complete and current. I'll tell another story. See, here's the problem when you've got 35 years of IT experience. You have a lot of stories that you can tell. So another story was what jumped out at me on this slide is the detailed network diagrams and architecture for recovery has to be correct. So we were doing another disaster recovery test years later at that same organization, and we actually restored our SAP server on top of our production SAP server. So yes, we wiped out an entire day of data trying to do a disaster recovery test and then had to recover from that. So the documentation has to be current and up to date. The other aspect about documentation is it has to be good enough that anybody could execute it. What do I mean by that? Well, we all joke about what happens if the proverbial bus hits Bill on his way to work. How are we going to have his knowledge to be able to recover? Well, I tell you, it's more than just the proverbial bus. In the time of a disaster, depending on how widespread that disaster and the nature of the disaster, your team may not be available. They may not be focused on your business systems. We had some clients that were involved in Hurricane Sandy several years ago. Their IT team was all fine and healthy, so to speak, but what they were worried about was their friends, their relatives, their family. Were they safe? Were they secure? Was their house safe? Was their house secure? Those were the things that were on their mind, not recovering the data systems. We were able to reach through, so to speak, into their side of the equation and perform their steps of disaster recovery for them because their documentation was solid enough. We knew what steps we needed to take. Another great example was when we went disaster recovery as a service while I was CIO for Goodwill. We had it documented so well that our CFO actually executed one of our ITDR failover tests. He had the playbook, he went through it, he worked with our provider and was able to recover our systems. So not only updating your documentation, but make sure it's complete enough that anybody can perform the test. Which leads us to mistake number 7, not involving key constituents. Everybody needs to be involved in ITDR. ITDR is not just for IT anymore, and the dirty secret is it never really was. You have to involve all of your stakeholders when you're developing your disaster recovery plan. You have to involve them in testing. You have to involve them in validation. You need to understand what are their drivers, what is important to them during the disaster recovery scenario or even in the disaster recovery plan. We had a client several years ago that's a major law firm, and looking at that on the surface, you would think that one of their drivers was the cost of their downtime. I mean, they've got a whole partnership full of attorneys that charge $450, $500 an hour. If they have 1,000 attorneys, think of the cost of downtime. And it was interesting when we talked to them because that was not their primary driver. Their primary driver instead was one of their largest clients came to them and said, "Thou shalt do DR and thou shalt prove that it works." That was their driver. So they understood that they had to involve other constituents, whether they be auditors, insurance companies, regulators, the business units, executives, and boards. What is important to them, and how does that fit into your disaster recovery plan and strategy? Auditors and insurance companies, as an example, now are looking for third-party certifications of your disaster recovery test. Does it work? Is it working as it's supposed to? Are you able to recover within your RTOs that you're putting out to your business partners? We've seen cyber insurance companies now ask for proof of disaster recovery before issuing a cyber insurance policy. So making sure you involve everyone in the disaster recovery strategy is very important. Mistake number 8, not ensuring your technical and business requirements are met. I promised we'd get back on culture, and this is really where this begins to play in. What are your technical drivers? What are your technical requirements? Those are obviously very important in an ITDR scenario. But what are your business outcomes? Do you want DR to be a core strategy for your business? Are you worried about leveraging, limiting revenue and reputational risk? Just what is it that you're trying to protect against? That will help define your role within the IT scenario. From a culture perspective, you have to ask yourself, do you really want your IT team to be experts at ITDR? That sounds like somewhat of a silly question, but it's really very important. If you've got an IT team and they are doing a DR test, they're probably doing it once a year. That's not something that you can really build a true competency around. Several years ago, I was at a conference and I heard a gentleman explain, you know, there's really only 2 types of IT projects. There's AC projects and there's CF projects. And he kind of chuckled and said, yeah, I know, we've all been part of those projects that you would label as CF projects, but I'm not talking about clusters. I'm talking about a grading scale. It's projects that you could hit a home run, a grand slam, walk off the field, home run to win the game, and the best grade that your business is going to give you is a C. No one is ever going to walk into your office and shake your hand and say, thank you for delivering my email today. But I can guarantee you, if email is not being delivered, there will be a line forming out your door and you will receive an F. On the other hand, there's a variety of AC projects that add tremendous value to the business. If you hit a home run doing an AC project, you're going to be a business value add partner to the rest of the corporation, the rest of the company. Those are the kinds of projects that you probably want your IT team focused on. What are their top 5 priorities? Is it to keep the lights on? Is it to test DR? Or is it to support your end customers through technology? Is there a strategy at your company? Is there a cloud strategy? Is there an ITDR strategy? How does that play with your overall corporate strategy? What's your culture like when it comes to outsourcing? Is that something your company is comfortable with? Because that cloud is really just a function of outsourcing. You're partnering with a client to deliver IT services on behalf of your IT department. So IT is more than just, DR is more than just IT. Your partner, whoever you partner with on a disaster recovery as a service scale, must consider and understand your business outcomes. Now, I think we have a poll question that we're going to push.
Yes, we just opened them up for everyone. If everyone could take a few minutes or a few seconds and answer the question here.
So I'll go through the responses as you're answering them. One of your challenges might be can't keep up with the changing infrastructure and applications, so change management. You're not 100% virtualized, so how can you use a disaster recovery as a service solution? You're in need of expert advice. You don't know where to start. You think this is a good fit for your organization, but you're not sure. You have a very limited budget, so how can you do disaster recovery testing? How can you define a disaster recovery strategy on a limited budget? And you don't have time to address it. You've got conflicting priorities, you have higher priorities, and you never seem to have time to address ITDR, so you need more efficient solutions.
All right, wonderful. We're going to go ahead and close it and publish the results for everyone to see. What we ended up with. Leading the charge at 43% is can't keep up with changing infrastructure and apps. Second place, no time for it, need more efficient solutions. Oops, I'm sorry, limited budget second, and no time farts in third with 17%, and not 100% virtualized in fourth, and needing expert advice is pulling up the rear there. So I'm going to go ahead and back to the presentation now.
Popping up that poll, lost my place in the slide deck. Let me bring that up here real quick. Okay, so thank you very much for answering that poll question. We appreciate that. We're going to turn our attention to Bluelock, talk a little bit about who Bluelock is, and then we'll open up for the audience questions. So who we are is really quite simple. We're an extension of your IT team. Bluelock provides disaster recovery as a service across a variety of platforms. Not only do we become an extension of your IT team, but we also offer 4 SLAs related to your disaster recovery progress. So SLA, service level agreement. Many firms out there offer infrastructure availability. What that means is they guarantee that in the event of a disaster, the infrastructure will be there for you to run your applications upon. Bluelock takes it a lot further than that, and we offer up to 4 SLAs. We will actually guarantee your recovery time objective. So during the onboarding process, we work with your team to determine what the recovery time will be for your application, and we back that up with an SLA. We can also help you avoid all 8 of these DR pitfalls along with many, many others. One of the things that we're especially proud of is we believe that we are one of the best DR as a service providers in the world. And we're not the only one that thinks that. The analysts, the respected analysts across the IT industry also see us as one of the leaders. Gartner has named us as a leader in their Magic Quadrant for disaster recovery as a service. One of the things that they highlighted in there is that we had the highest reference customer satisfaction scores among all the providers. That means a lot to Bluelock. That means a lot to our clients. We do what we say and we say what we do. Forrester just recently named us as a leader in the recovery wave for disaster recovery as a service, scoring us the highest in 10 of the evaluation criteria. These are all things that make us who we are. We get told time and time again, you are asking questions and thinking about things that no one else is. Now I'd like to spend the rest of the time and open it up for questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Jeff. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. Again, as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the question panel you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. Our first question today, we have virtual and non-virtual systems. How does DRaaS work when you have that combination?
That's a great question, because a lot of DRaaS solutions talk about virtual to virtual replication. In other words, copying a virtual machine to the cloud to be used on another virtual machine. But there are technologies that can be leveraged to also copy physical machines to the cloud, either physical to virtual, so that they're virtualized when they're running in the cloud, or even physical to physical. So those scenarios do work, and in fact, part of what you have to do, as we're talking earlier about tiering the applications, you have to take those requirements into consideration. How much is virtualized? How much is physical? When does the physical recovery need to start versus the virtual recovery? All of those things play together to form an entire solution.
All right, next question here. I'm interested in tiering applications process. I have a priority list from my business, but how do I start breaking those into tiers?
I think you have to understand the recovery time objectives. So as you're looking at the tiers, how fast do you need those recovered? The business has said what the priorities are, but relate that to the time involved in getting them recovered. And then also the recovery point objective comes into play here. How much data loss can you withstand on those applications? So you may choose an application that has a very, very low requirement, or depending on how you look at it, you can only withstand 30 seconds loss of data. So you're going to tier that into a recovery tier that will support a very fast RTO and a very, very small RPO. And that will begin to define how you put those into tiers. Same thing if you have an application that is on a lower priority and the data loss is not as important, that might go into a tier 3 where you have an RTO, recovery time objective, of 24 to 48 hours and an RPO, or recovery point, of 24 hours, because you only do your backups to the cloud once a day. So your recovery point by default almost becomes 24 hours. So you begin to look at your applications in that way and start slotting them into tiers.
All right, wonderful. Next question. What RPOs and RTOs do you support?
So Bluelock offers a support across a wide range of RTOs and RPOs. We have a service called DRaaS Run, which is an RTO in minutes and a recovery point of seconds. Those are for, obviously, applications that need to come online very, very quickly. You can think of it as active infrastructure, where the application may not be active, but the infrastructure is sitting there ready and waiting. We have another tier called DRaaS Ready, which is an RTO of 4 to 8 hours, depending on the applications and the waves that you've defined within the disaster recovery plan. RPOs on that range from several seconds to several minutes, depending on how that is set up and depending on whether it's physical or virtual. And then we have DRaaS Restore, which is our cloud backup for recovery purposes. So it's a backup that then gets copied to the cloud and you can restore from that point. The RTO on that is 24 to 48 hours, and the RPO, as I mentioned, is typically 24 hours.
All right, next question. Does Bluelock leverage Zerto or any other tools for its DRaaS?
We partner with the best in the industry, so yes, we do partner with Zerto. I think we had a slide, there you go, across the bottom. There lists some of the technology partners that we partner with: Zerto, Veeam, VMware, DoubleTake, because we believe that providing those best-of-breed solutions is really what makes disaster recovery as a service work and work well.
All right, what's the best way to define with the business the level of service and contingency?
I'm going to interpret that and say the level of, so the recovery point objective or the recovery time objective. I think as you sit down with your business partners and have those discussions, trying to understand from their perspective what's the impact on that application if it's not there. I think it's a conversation, it's a dialogue that you have to have with your business partners. A lot of companies will use a business impact analysis service, a professional services engagement to come in and help guide that conversation, or at least use IT's understanding, a business impact understanding of what the impact of that application is. It comes down to almost a dollars and cents thing, in that if that application is not available, what is the impact to the business for 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. When I was CIO at Loth, we had defined our recovery time objective as 8 hours. And it was interesting because in conversations with the business everything was a priority. So yes, we want all our applications and we want them all recovered in under 8 hours. And everybody knows if everything's a number one priority, then nothing's a number one priority. But we had an incident very early on in my tenure there in which we lost our storage array. It went down. As the vendor described it, it was a 1 in a million occurrence where 2 RAID 5 drives fail at the same time. And it took not 8 hours to recover, it took us 3 days to recover off the backup tapes. So you also need to not only understand what the business requirements are, but really fully understand the solution that you're providing. Hope that helps address that.
All right, next question. Is latency a concern with replication for your solution?
Latency is always very important to address. It's one of the things that becomes most complicated about DR replication, DR testing, and DR failover is how is the network going to behave, how is the network going to work in replication mode, in failover mode, in testing mode. And so we actually work very closely with a company's network engineers to understand what are the requirements for latency, what's the application response time that's expected, how large of a pipe is needed. Can you replicate, for example, over the public internet, or do you need a dedicated pipe into your cloud services provider? And all that begins to get defined based on the technology requirements of the client and the business requirements of the clients working together to solve that issue.
Perfect. Next question here. What are some forms of proof that cyber insurance companies are looking for before they insure an organization?
So typically what they're looking for is an independent certification that the test was successful. And that certification might be data off your replication technology. Somebody asked about Zerto earlier. Zerto provides a report at the end of a failover test that shows whether or not it was successful. That may be sufficient. In other cases, they want more than that. One of the things that Bluelock offers is a certified, signed off test. So when we conduct a test with our clients, we will sign it, they will sign it, that it was successful and met all of their criteria. That we found presented to the cyber insurance companies shows that you've not only tested, but you validated and a third party was involved in the validation.
All right. What is your DR strategy advice when a company adds new business units that come with a host of new systems and applications?
That is a great question because that does happen a lot. And in some cases, they may already come not only with that whole host of applications, they may already come with a DR strategy. I think the best approach to that would be to sit down not only with the IT team, but the business representatives and identify what's going to be the solution going forward. Part of it might be, well, for the time being, we're going to support 2 different approaches to disaster recovery, but over time, we're going to merge them together. Or you could have a company that you've acquired and have merged with, and they don't have a DR strategy at all. So then you can bring their applications in much in the same way that you did initially with your own. It starts with understanding the impact to the business, an understanding of what are the requirements, and mapping that then into your existing solution. Where do those applications fit? Part of the problem with that type of activity, a merger or acquisition like that, is it may take you some amount of time to understand what are the application dependencies that are there today and tomorrow, because over time you will probably consolidate systems. There may be integrations between systems, so your application dependencies may change over time. And so that's part of one of the things we talked about earlier, change management and keeping track of changes and how they impact your DR plan and your DR strategy is paramount in a merger and acquisition mode.
All right. If the BIA RTO for a particular process is 4 hours and our infrastructure RTO is 1 hour or less using DRaaS, does that mean you have overspent on your DR solutions per what the business needs?
No, I wouldn't say that because as an example, if it's more than a single application, your infrastructure may be ready in an hour, but that doesn't mean the application is ready, nor does it mean that you've swung your network over to them. So remember, it gets back to setting those proper expectations and mapping your solution into the appropriate tier of application. So if you believe that your true RTO is going to be 4 hours, then you're spending it the right amount. If you believe your RTO that you've purchased is an hour, then you may want to move to, in our case, I'll use the example of our product names, DRaaS Run, which is recovery in almost immediate, so think about that hour time frame, versus DRaaS Restore, which is 4 hours. You could move that application into that other tier and more align it with the value of the business if you feel like you're overspending in that. But I would say it probably fits into your overall strategy and the application portfolio that it is a member of and how fast that full portfolio comes back online for your end user.
All right. If our company does not have a DR in place, where would you recommend us to start?
Call Bluelock. No, I'm kidding. I think attending webinars like this is a great place to start. I think it starts to educate you, provides you the words that you can then educate your business on the importance of it. Leverage current events. If you're trying to get a DR, if part of the problem is you need to do DR, and you can't get the business's attention to fund a DR project, if that is your problem, use current events. I joked earlier about the WannaCry malware attack, ransomware attack. Use that. Go to them and say, see, these businesses were impacted by this. That could have been us. This could have been the impact. So you begin to build a business case, a story around why DR is needed. But if you're just trying to learn, then attending these webinars is great. I'll put a plug in for DRJ's conference. They have great breakout sessions there that help go through the soup to nuts on disaster recovery and what goes into a plan. So there's a lot of resources around to start building your knowledge base.
Wonderful. There are several questions here we did not get to here today. They might be a little too detailed or a little too product oriented. Jeff and the Bluelock team will have access to these questions, and we'll follow up with you directly after the webinar is ended here today. So any parting words here today, Jeff?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, Bob. I would say to those that are listening, if you're looking to start DR, attend more webinars, learn. Look at DR as a service. It's a great way to leverage cloud. If you're not, if you haven't really built a cloud strategy yet, or you're wanting to figure out how to start leveraging cloud, DR as a service is a great first step. If you're already cloud savvy, then DR as a service can help protect your investment as well.
All right, wonderful. Great session and great Q&A too as well. And thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope it gathered some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Jeff for his time here today, as well as Bluelock for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be sending a link to today's recording. You may view it as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you do have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thanks again, and this now ends today's webinar.